Do you believe in sexual liberation? It's been a hard-fought and ultimately hard-won battle on many fronts, ones that still rage across numerous varieties of detractors. It is immediately clear to those of a liberal orientation, of course, it is not only a necessity of social and political freedom, but the remedy of millennia of oppression which has afflicted sexual minorities, and the depuritanification of culture which celebrates and allows an honest exploration of the human sexual life in all its passion and romance and other feelings is a necessary step for a good life. Meanwhile, those of the more conservative persuasions were, and generally remain, unconvinced by these attitudes. Their rationale arguably varies more wildly, stemming either from a belief in God and sin, in which most sexual acts are sinful due to the defilement of one of our most sacred activities, or argue from the basis of social harm, wherein behaviors like promiscuity are seen as socially detrimental either to the individuals or, often as it is phrased, the social fabric. There is a wealth of far more versed individuals to draw from for any given perspective, and obviously a whole lot that isn't covered by the extremely generalized conservative/liberal dichotomy. I myself don't particularly fall into it either, as I'm sure you don't. All of our beliefs are more nuanced than a single paragraph can really provide. But I think there is genuine credence to both main perspectives. Of course, I should admit my biases. I am naturally predisposed towards supporting full-scale sexual liberation, on account that I have slept with every single one of your mothers. I am also just extremely progressive generally, because I am an anarchist, and even when accounting for prior conditions of a state, I remain progressive. However, I also care significantly about social impact. The exact same progressive position which recognizes our social entwinement and how our actions and our words have a necessary, even if sometimes minimal, impact on those around us, and therefore we ought to be careful or selective in our behavior and speech, also provides the framework for the conservative position to be potentially the fundamentally correct one. I believe we can care about what other people do. That does not automatically mean anything we should care about should therefore be made illegal, but social shaming is not automatically a bad thing. We should indeed, I would argue, socially shun harmful behavior, such as lying and theft. It is not wrong to call them a liar and a thief, nor to say that those are the qualities of a bad person. What is right, we should collectively encourage, and what is wrong, we collectively discourage. A good case study is the use of slurs. Insofar as they are genuinely harmful, you should be shamed for using them. If it is true that sexual promiscuity is harmful, I think it is fair to say that it should be discouraged. If not legally, then at least each of us should be able to say, this isn't the kind of thing we like, and we have every right to not associate with people engaging in behaviors we consider wrong. I don't want to associate with someone who manipulates or demeans others, for example. Applying this to sexual promiscuity, there is only one question to ask. What is the impact? It's never enough to gesture at the ideological justification for social shaming and then hand-wave the actual question of whether the practice in question falls within your criteria. Fortunately, this is a scientific question, excluding theological beliefs. We can, generally speaking, find a definitive answer. This isn't ideological. It's what we do with that answer that is. I'm sure I don't have to get into exact, descriptive detail about the physical and biological mechanisms and changes in play during sexual activity. If you're watching this video, that clearly means you get so much action that any detail would be preaching to the choir. God, it is so hot in here. Oh my god. What we're interested in is the psychological and neurological impact, especially the long-term effects. And one of the ways we see that is both knowing how the brain itself physically and chemically reacts, and then also mapping on to long-term behavior. Light maps of the brain during arousal and orgasm are veritable galaxies. Regions of the brain that are activated include the limbic system, which consists of the hippocampus, which forms memories, the thalamus, which processes sensory information, the amygdala, which helps shape how we experience and feel emotions, and the hypothalamus, which produces hormones, and especially contributes to sexual arousal. The striatum also activates, which works to regulate multiple cognitive functions and is a key component in the processing of rewards and the sensation of pleasure. Interestingly, some research also indicates that the prefrontal cortex, responsible for impulse control and decision-making, is actually deactivated during arousal and orgasm, and some have suggested this is the reason we are particularly prone to making poor or risky decisions. However, research is mixed, with one study suggesting activation of the region, and positing that the difference in measured experience relates to the methodology used, such as how the activity is actually measured, specifically between fMRIs and PETs. Though another necessary caveat is that the second study specifically has a shockingly small sample size of 10 women. So I wouldn't put too much stock in it, but for what it's worth, it also found activation in multiple cortical and subcortical regions, consisting of a lot of long and difficult to pronounce and not particularly relevant regional terms. Some examples being the dorsomedial prefrontal cortex, the cingulate gyrus, and the firmus, whatever that means. Basically, it included regions involved in sensory, motor, reward, cortical, and brainstem processes. On the hormone level, we primarily see dopamine, which is responsible in large part for feelings of happiness and pleasure and is the primary hormone of the reward circuit. Vasopressin regulates sexual motivation, especially in men, and develops a feeling of attachment and possible aggression. Oxytocin, colloquially the love hormone, also responsible for feeling good and bonding, also pain relief. And after orgasm, the body releases serotonin, which helps with relaxation and drowsiness. Endorphins are also released into the brain during orgasm, acting as natural painkillers and providing a sense of euphoria and relaxation. The catalyst for writing this has been delving into some new social circles. Those I ran with before were very progressive. Yet, despite this progressivism, or perhaps from their source, as most tend to be significantly religious also, there was a sort of puritanism about them. And I don't mean that negatively. Sex was still sacred, and although they believed love should be free, that does not mean they supported hookups or flings or one-night stands, and especially not pornography and associated activities. But I've expanded onto a new platform, Substack, which is moderately less progressive, surprisingly, but extremely sex positive, celebrating the erotic and the lustful. I would want to argue, to debate this perspective. I have long believed, before this project, that there genuinely were negative effects of promiscuity, and that it was something to be discouraged. But I needed to have better research before engaging with this. All this in mind, we may not be able to necessarily predict the outcome of high amounts of sexual contact, but we can better understand the mechanisms behind any outcome the science has found. There are several dimensions across which we would want to know the consequences, and that we can measure, at least indirectly. Broader, more pervasive consequences may not be able to be teased out by most study designs, such as the kind of permeable weakening of social fabric suggested by opposition. Does engaging in promiscuity increase the prevalence of immoral behavior across such a wide domain that it produces negative outcomes in life? Or, even more pertinently, and even more difficult to parse, does it harm us spiritually? Fortunately, the social fabric is not some immaterial, ineffable phenomenon predating or external to us. It is merely the interplay of material facts, and individually we can study them. We can look at the trends and causes of antisocial, antitrustful, and uncooperative behavior. Spiritually, I can't say. That's for each one of us to decide. One avenue to wander down would certainly be that of happiness. Does sexual promiscuity have any measurable impact on future or current levels of happiness? Chang and Smith tried to look into this with their 2015 article appropriately titled Sex and Happiness. They got survey data from just under 3,800 people in China. Per the results, having sex was itself important to happiness. Indeed, having sex frequently with one's primary sexual partner was positively correlated with happiness, but only infrequent sex was negatively correlated. At the same time, the actual quality of the sex, i.e. the physical and emotional satisfaction with their partner and their intercourse, was also correlated with happiness. Completely unsurprisingly, extramarital sex, or having concurrent sexual relationships with multiple people, was negatively associated with happiness, even for both partners. What is interesting to note, however, is that almost all of these associations were much stronger for women than for men. One notable exception is the second unsurprising correlation that having sex to satisfy their partner but not themselves, i.e. being unwilling but conceding anyway, decreases happiness. More interestingly and relevant is the finding that having only one concurrent sexual partner had the highest correlation with happiness, as compared to 2 or 3 or more concurrent partners, which decreased happiness. However, this isn't the smoking gun we're after. Monogamy producing greater happiness than non-monogamy is of course an important finding and one we need to consider in this discussion, but it is not the same as having multiple monogamous partners across a period of time, known as serial monogamy, which is what is generally meant by promiscuity and how I use the term here. And there are important methodological issues with the study that must be addressed. Namely, it cannot show causation, only correlation. Also, there could very well be mediating biases in the survey responses, as it cannot be ruled out that people responded with less than the perfect truth in an aim to conform to expectations of what is good. Additionally, the cohort cannot necessarily be translated to other demographics due to the uniquely poor sex education across China compared to developed nations. Nevertheless, it was consistent with an older study conducted in 2004 by Blanche Flower and Oswald. To quote, "This paper studies the links between income, sexual behavior, and reported happiness. It uses recent data on a random sample of 16,000 adult Americans. The paper finds that sexual activity enters strongly positively in happiness equations. Greater income does not buy more sex, nor more sexual partners. The typical American has sexual intercourse 2 to 3 times a month. Married people have more sex than those who are single, divorced, widowed, or separated. Sexual activity appears to have greater effects on the happiness of highly educated people than those with low levels of education. The happiness maximizing number of sexual partners in the previous year is calculated to be 1. Highly educated females tend to have fewer sexual partners. Homosexuality has no statistically significant effect on happiness. Our conclusions are based on pooled cross-section equations in which it is not possible to correct for the endogeneity of sexual activity. The statistical results should be treated cautiously." That's a nice narrative. It's a public-facing narrative. All of it's true, but it's just the catalyst, not the actual reason. I'm looking into this because I personally struggle with this. I value intimacy and I value exclusivity and I value the bond of a relationship. Yet I still find myself craving physical touch even when I'm not in one. I desired not to find some objective measure, but to reassure myself, either that I should feel no guilt in what I pursue, or to affirm that my guilt is onto something and to listen to it. There's a crudeness to what I feel. It makes me sick at times, yet I can never put it to rest. Alternatively, we may look at relationship satisfaction and stability. One study conducted by Kahn in London and published in 1991 did just that. Quote again, "This article examines the relationship between premarital sexual activity and the long-term risk of divorce among U.S. women married between 1965 and 1985. Simple cross-tabulations from the 1988 National Survey of Family Growth indicate that women who were sexually active prior to marriage faced a considerably higher risk of marital disruption than women who were virgin brides. A bivariate probit model is employed to examine 3 possible explanations for this positive relationship. A direct causal effect. B, an indirect effect through intervening high-risk behaviors, such as having a premarital birth or marrying at a young age. And C, a selectivity effect representing prior differences between virgins and non-virgins, such as family background or attitudes and values. After a variety of observable characteristics are controlled, non-virgins still face a much higher risk of divorce than virgins. But they go on in the same paragraph, and this is a very important thing to emphasize. However, when the analysis controls for unobserved characteristics affecting both the likelihood of having premarital sex and the likelihood of divorce, the differential is no longer statistically significant. These results suggest that the positive relationship between premarital sex and the risk of divorce can be attributed to prior unobserved differences, e.g. the willingness to break traditional norms, rather than to a direct causal effect. More recent studies have tried to more closely examine the relationship between sex partners and relationship satisfaction and divorce rates. Without controlling for some variables, individuals with premarital sexual partners were 161% more likely to divorce than a couple who got married as virgins. When controlling for the variables of, and this will be a long-winded list, union status, past marriages and divorces, age of marriage, premarital cohabitation, parenthood, premarital fertility, multiple partner fertility, sex, race/ethnicity, God, education, family structure of origin, parents' education, parents' religion, parent-child relationship quality, parent-child recent activities, current religion, religion growing up, frequency of worship, frequency of prayer, importance of religion, biblical literalism, virginity pledges, sex okay and perfect relationship, age of first sex, adolescent coercive sex, depressive symptoms, delinquent behaviors, and lastly, cautious decision-making style. When all of these are controlled for, non-virgin marriages are 151% more likely to divorce. The authors see two possibilities for research going forward on account of this. Firstly, there may genuinely be some causal relationship between premarital sexual partners and divorce rates, but there was not enough information to say that. Or, selection mechanics are still responsible for these differences, but future research needs to reconsider the nature of those mechanisms and what they could be. They give as examples that there may be genetic components or unaddressed psychological components such as hypersexuality that can account for both promiscuity and divorce. God, it's so bright. Like that. The camera's so messed up. Oh, God. God. Oh, it's so bad. I know the visual quality really sucks right now. There's unfortunately nothing I can really do about that at the moment. It's very, very unfortunate. I'm just gonna have to deal with that for the time being. I'll have to figure something out. I don't know what though. Another study is a little more peculiar and particular. Drawing from the National Survey of Family Growth, data shows that women are most likely to get married if they have exactly one premarital partner, at 95%. For virgins, it is only 87%. And with more than one partner, the chances steadily decrease. And this effect appears to be causal. But there's a caveat. Applying additional data from the National Longitudinal Survey of Youth and doing funky technical stuff to the statistics that you can read more about in the article itself if you're interested. The link is in the description below, as with all of my sources with the video, if you're interested in any of them. They found that only the number of recent partners produces statistically significant results. That's so interesting. Basically, the number of sexual partners an individual had in the past year had a causal effect on their chances of getting married, but not necessarily divorced after the fact, as the study doesn't touch on that. But that lifetime sexual partners does not exhibit this same causal effect. Even more interestingly, having 0 sexual partners in the past year actually gives significantly worse chances of getting married than any amount past 1. The effects are not significantly different for men or women, so it generally appears as though there are short-term direct consequences, but not long-term, at least not generally. One important question that was not touched on by the article, however, is that it is not yet explained why there is a causal relationship. Especially, there is yet to be good research into whether or not this existing causal relationship is because of biological factors or because of cultural and social factors, and thus whether it is innate in us or if it can be changed by continually changing attitudes towards sex. But NSFG data can provide insights about divorce, or at minimum, correlations. Demographics are, of course, shifting. In the 1970s, 21% of women were entering marriage as virgins, compared to 5% in the 2010s. In the 1970s, 2% of women had 10 or more non-marital sexual partners, compared to 18% in the 2010s. Comparing different cohorts, it was consistently found that virgin marriages had the least chance of divorce within 5 years of wedlock. Quote, 11% of virgin marriages, on the part of the woman at least, in the 1980s dissolved within 5 years. This number fell to 8% in the 1990s, then fell again to 6% in the 2000s. For all three cohorts, the second lowest rate of divorce was women with only one premarital partner, but the odds did increase. Then things get a little weirder, and I'll let the article explain. In the 1980s and 1990s, the highest 5-year divorce rates were reserved for women who had two partners. The effect was particularly strong in the 1980s, when these women had divorce rates of 28%, substantially higher than those of their peers who had 10 or more sex partners prior to marriage, 18%. Even in the aughts, women who had two partners had, at 30%, the second highest divorce rates in the table. The highest 5-year divorce rates of all are associated with marrying in the 2000s and having 10 or more premarital sex partners, 33%. Perhaps it is not unexpected that having many partners increases the odds of divorce. The greater surprise is that this only holds true in recent years. Previously, women with two partners prior to marriage had the highest divorce rates. These results have potentially many different explanations, none of which we can be fully confident in. Additionally, the shifting of the effect across decades, and especially the relative significance of specifically two sexual partners, is unknown. And although there are hypotheses, such as religiosity or curiosity, or other possible confounding variables, the study itself couldn't provide anything rigorous. But what of marriage happiness? Though it is intuitive that unhappy marriages are more likely to end in divorce, and that divorces are more likely to happen in unhappy marriages, it's not always as clean as that. My phone's on the table. My bad. I forgot about that. And there can be multiple major extenuating factors that change the interplay between disillusion and dissatisfaction. So deriving it from divorce alone is untenable. Fortunately, there has been research on this. Multiple studies have found that people with multiple sexual partners prior to marriage have unhappier relationships than couples who only slept with each other. And at least one such study has found that that correlation only exists for women and not for men. So more robust national data was analyzed from the General Social Survey from 1989 to 2016. Quote, women who've only slept with their spouses are, at 65%, most likely to report very happy marriages. Thereafter, there is a decline that's statistically significant but modest in magnitude. The lowest odds of marital happiness, 52% in the baseline model, accord to women who've had 6 to 10 lifetime sexual partners. Women who've had 11 or more lovers are a bit more likely to report happy marriages at 57%. Controlling for religion, prior divorce, and education and income did not have significant effects on the results. For men, the results are broadly similar, but differ in particular. As for women, men who report only one sexual partner in their lifetime are more likely to report very happy marriages. The benefits of one partner are slightly greater for men than for women. According to the baseline results, 71% of men with one partner are very happy in the relationship. This drops to 65% for men who report 2 or more sex partners. The happiness penalty for additional partners is modest, only a few percentage points. Adjusting for differences in marital history, socioeconomic status, and religion make little difference. Again, multiple possible explanations exist, such as genetic or psychological factors, and no causal relationship can be made apparent. Additionally, there are multiple statistical challenges, just as with most research on the matter. Less importantly for this study in particular, people just aren't always honest with their sexual history. But also, the relationship between marital happiness and sexual history is likely incredibly complicated in a way these numbers alone can't show. And there very well could be selection bias, with cheaters complicated things severely. But research into other markings of mental health are also vital for understanding this topic. That research is often contradictory, suggesting a very complicated set of factors and variables at play. For example, Rangelova and Ong in 2014, quote, examined the moderating influence of sociosexuality, a stable personality orientation toward casual sex, on psychological well-being, self-esteem, life satisfaction, depression, and anxiety. Following penetrative, oral, vaginal, or anal, casual sex among single undergraduates. As predicted, social sexuality moderated the effect of casual sex on well-being on a weekly basis across 12 consecutive weeks, over one semester, and over one academic year. Sociosexuality unrestricted students typically reported higher well-being after having casual sex compared to not having casual sex. There were no such differences among restricted individuals. Few gender differences were found. In another of Rangelova's studies, they assessed the outcome of casual sex with respect to self-determination theory. Shout out to my positive psychology textbooks, right up there. Basically, it examines whether our motives for engaging in actions are autonomous, coming from ourselves, or non-autonomous, from external factors. Autonomous, self-directed casual sex was correlated with positive well-being, such as for self-esteem, whereas non-autonomous and other directed casual sex was correlated with decreased well-being. Gender was not a mitigating factor. However, that gender did not have an effect is contrary to many other studies, and has been methodologically criticized. A relatively small study of Canadian university students found that while regret following a casual sex encounter was frequently recorded by both men and women, women reported it significantly more regret, and a woman's regret was not primarily tied to physical attributes, as was men's. Additionally, high-quality sex resulted in less regret, and low-quality, more. Kinnair et al. Had similar findings in 2018. Quote, results suggest that greater feelings of worry, experiencing disgust, and feeling pressured to have sex predicted more regret for casual sex. In contrast, experiencing higher levels of sexual gratification, finding the partner to be sexually competent, and being the one taking the initiative predicted less sexual regret. Predictors of casual sex regret was not moderated by nation. However, relative to men, most of these predictors had a stronger impact on women's likelihood of regretting their most recent casual sex encounter. Townsend and Wasserman did as well in 2011. Regression analyses of survey data from 333 male and 363 female college students revealed the following. Greater permissiveness of sexual attitudes was positively associated with number of sex partners. This association was not moderated by sex of subject, prediction 1. Even when women deliberately engaged in casual sex relations, thoughts that expressed worry and vulnerability crossed their minds. For females, greater number of partners was associated with increased worry vulnerability, whereas for males, the trend was the opposite, prediction 2. With increasing numbers of sex partners, marital thoughts decreased. This finding was not moderated by sex of subject. This finding did not support prediction 3. For both males and females, greater number of partners was related to larger numbers of one-night stands, partners foreseen in the next 5 years, and deliberately casual sex relationships. This trend was significantly stronger for males than for females, prediction 4. Given this often contradictory research, one study was attempted to be significantly more robust and account for many more possibilities, examining both outcomes and motivations. On the outcome side, women demonstrated significantly more negative outcomes, including loneliness, unhappiness, rejection, regret, general negative feelings, and a perception of negative judgment from others. Men got the better end, experiencing positive psychological enhancement, including greater sexual satisfaction, happiness, self-confidence, contentment, and mood improvement. Motivations for engaging with casual sex were sorted into different types: regulating negative emotions, achieving positive emotions, due to an unsatisfying relationship, intimacy seeking, and external influence. Attempting to regulate negative emotions was correlated with negative outcomes, and attempting to achieve positive emotions was correlated with neutral outcomes. There are serious limitations in this study, as there are in all of them, and future research should control for many more variables such as sociosexuality. Nevertheless, it provides good insight that why we hook up influences how we feel about it afterwards, and that it influences us differently by gender. Another analysis was conducted with data gathered by the Dunedin Multidisciplinary Health and Development Study in New Zealand. They examined the relationship between the number of sexual partners and rates of depression, anxiety, and substance use disorder, and how gender mediates them. For depression and anxiety, there was no correlation with the sex partner count for either gender, which is the opposite of what I would have predicted. For substance use disorder, however, there was a very strong correlation, wherein an increase of sex partners was consistently related to an increase in the chance of having a substance use disorder. And while this was true for both men and women, it was significantly more prominent for women. The authors put forth 4 possibilities as potential explanations. God, I love alliteration. Firstly, as a high number of other studies have suggested, sexual risk-taking and substance risk-taking can be part of the same personality characteristics, and thus both related to some other factor. Secondly, for which there is also literature supporting it, substance use may cause sexual promiscuity. The mechanism may be, for example, that substance use inhibits impulse control or distorts risk assessment. Thirdly, it could be happenstance and context, such that, for example, individuals are more likely to meet where alcohol is being served, and that environment induces both substance use and sexual contact. Fourthly, the amount of sexual partners may exhibit a causal influence on the substance use. As one example, which has backing in the literature, substance use may be a coping mechanism for negative feelings associated with multiple partners, such as regret or sorrow from failed relationships, or perhaps the impersonal nature of the relationships contributes. Which of the four propositions is the predominant explanation is yet to be figured out. Berseman et al. In 2014 found that in a sample population of 3,907 college students across the US aged 18 to 25, participating in casual sex was positively correlated with psychological distress and negatively correlated with well-being, unmoderated by gender. Still, Eisenberg et al. In 2009, with a cohort of 1,111 young adults in Minnesota, found that those engaging in recent casual sex had no greater risk of psychological harm than those in committed relationships. There may be differences in methodology or definitions that can explain these discrepancies, or some other factor we just don't know how to account for. Lastly, we can examine physical health as it relates to promiscuity. Although this isn't precisely a neurological thing, which is the kind of, the main focus here, it would feel a disservice to exclude it from discussion entirely. I think a large portion of my craving for physical intimacy, of lust, is really caused by a craving of emotional and cognitive intimacy. There is pleasure in it, of course, and that cannot be hand-waved away. Yet I have a desire to be wanted, to want, to care about pleasure, and to have another care about it the same. It is not the fact of pleasure that is appealing necessarily, but the fact that it is given relevancy, the choice, the connection. That is what I believe I desire. This would never be satisfied by a continual string of sexual contact. It can only be resolved through a connection. I have recently lost this connection that I had with someone I love, and thus I end up here, seeking reassurance in cold science. It can never replicate the warmth of familiarity. Analyzing the data from over 2,500 men and 3,100 women, it was found that men and women with over 10 lifetime sexual partners correlated with having a higher chance of being diagnosed with cancer than those with 0 to 1 lifetime partners. Women with over 10 partners also had a higher chance of reporting a limited long-standing illness. No other statistically significant relationship was found, such as for stroke or coronary heart disease. People with more sexual partners are also at greater risk of HIV than those with fewer partners. Interestingly, both excessive and low amounts of sexual interactions were found by another study to be related to mortality. The lowest risks of cardiovascular disease and all-cause mortality lies between 52 and 103 sexual interactions per year. Less than 12 had the highest risk. Personally, I can help you a lot with the former. And most obviously, with more sexual partners comes an even greater risk of STIs and continued transmission to others. A gap of 46 months for women and men respectively between sexual partners significantly reduced the risk of STI diagnoses. But everything is contextual. Someone with multiple sexual partners who regularly uses protection and gets regularly tested for STIs is likely to be at a lower risk of infection than someone in a committed relationship with one partner who does neither. The amount of partners is only one risk factor among many. Gotta put my hat back on for the ending. The research is in a bit of a confusing state right now. Mostly it's inconclusive. The most consistent point is that there is a negative correlation between promiscuity and relationship health, though why is unknown. But I think the self-determination theory perspective holds a lot of water, and as more and more variables are discussed and ironed out, I expect motivation to become a major part of the ongoing literature. It is, I'll admit, consistent with my own ideological framework and serves to support it. I have an intrinsic political bias to accept motivation as the overarching contributing factor, or at least one of them. But I also believe it's in line with not only where the research is heading, i.e. demographic and personality characteristics are not capable of explaining the correlation, yet neither is a causational relationship sufficient on account of the wide discrepancies between ages, cohorts, and cultural attitudes, but the broader sociological and psychological landscape generally, especially as it relates to well-being, inasmuch that well-being across almost every type of behavior is explainable to a significant degree by self-directed and other-directed motivations. That is, doing what we ourselves want to do is almost always positively associated with improved well-being, and doing something for some other reason isn't. I suppose there isn't a significant enough reason to suggest that sexual activities are unique in this manner. It is possible that they are, of course. They are certainly unique in a lot of other ways, but such a hypothesis must be tested before it is accepted. And I don't see any research for that yet. I also worry that I have a personal bias. In earnest reflection, I see that this is exactly what I want to hear, though I didn't know it going into this. It doesn't exactly direct me in any given way, but it gives me a method by which I can nullify my guilt and my concerns, no matter the direction I choose. It's an easy out and a nice, compelling narrative. More than that, it's a way to justify either decision. Not only in terms of a lack of negative consequences, but even to say that this is truly what is good for me. I don't know if this is genuinely what science is telling me is true, or what I want to be true. I think that scares me. The best lesson to take away, I think, is to know thyself. Know what it is you truly want and seek. Do as much self-reflecting as necessary to find out. Know what your motivations are. Know how you react to things. I think that if you're being promiscuous to fill some gap in your life, whether it be intimacy or gratification or a feeling of being wanted or of being loved even for a night, it won't do you any good. Unfortunately, getting our hole filled or filling a hole doesn't fill the hole in our hearts. But that doesn't mean all casual sex is bad. That doesn't mean it has to be reserved for committed relationships, though it may be less risky to reserve it until the research is more conclusive. You have to be honest with yourself. You have to know what you're doing and why you're doing it. And you have to be safe while you're doing it. The neurological impact of sexual promiscuity appears to be what you make it. It's not a choice per se, but we can, each of us, choose to do what is best for us individually. See, today I learned that if you smash your balls and penis with a hammer, it hurts a lot. Why do my eyes look purple?